particular meeting, the last step of the tour at Iraq, she had the foreign minister of Iran had in St. Petersburg.
Yes.
Pepe, what was that, and what was the importance of this meeting? Because Iranian wanted to update Russian part, they wanted to talk. And what is your understanding before Iran going to Moscow? Arakchi went to Islamabad, then Muscat, and later on the last visit was to St. Petersburg. What
That
do we
was,
know about that?
well, it was immensely, meticulously well planned, Nima. And this was, let's say, a mini tour of 3 cities in different stages. So I actually first went to Islamabad to talk to the Pakistani mediators. So what was he doing? He was basically re-stressing the 10 points, which apparently were read by the President of the United States, and obviously he didn't understand what he was reading. He even posted saying that he more or less agreed to it. We don't know what he read. If it was lost in translation, if it was a summary, if it was somebody, yapping at his ear, whatever. Anyway, so I actually had to tell the Pakistani mediators, look, the 10 pointers are still our position, but now we are refining it, assuming that the Americans, there's no negotiation, especially coming from Dumb and Dumber, Tweedledum and Tweedledee, Witkoff, Kushner. And from the Iranian point of view, the only possible negotiator from now on is Vance. Well, so after Islamabad, I actually went to Oman, where he was personally received by the emir. Very, very important. There were no leaks about what they discussed, but we can basically have a very good idea that it also involved the next setup for the Strait of Hormuz, which Iranians and Omanis are already trying to organize. So maybe we could have, let's say, a toll booth on the Iranian side and another toll booth on the Omani side. After all, these are not international waters. Once again, we have to repeat it. This is 21 nautical miles, the distance from the Iranian shore to the Omani shore. If you have 12 nautical miles on each country, that's 24, basic math. So their territorial waters are larger than the strait itself. So it's their territorial waters. So Iran has the perfect right to install a toll booth on Hormuz. And now they are discussing with the Omanis what's going to be on Omani territorial waters. After that, he went back to Islamabad. He didn't go straight to Moscow. He went back to Islamabad because he was refining the 3 key conditions by Iran if we're going to have any meaningful negotiations from now on. And that's when things start to get really, really interesting, because they turn the chessboard upside down, essentially. Number 1, the war has to end for good, with written assurances, with written guarantees, with big powers guaranteeing it. And if it goes to that useless UN Security Council, approved by the UN Security Council. Number 2, we're going to discuss what's going to happen to the Strait of Hormuz. Then Iran will have a new setup installed in the Strait of Hormuz, very similar to the one already now. It has already been essentially approved by the Iranian parliament. There will be a toll booth and paid in Iranian rials. So the Iranian currency can start at least stop being devalued. And number 3, which is the third and last stage, let's start discussing about the a new nuclear deal, which, if it happens, I would say the best possible case is a sort of diluted JCPOA, which, by the way, was killed by Trump himself. So he's not going to get a better JCPOA, a better from an American point of view than the original JCPOA discussed, clinched in 2015 in Vienna, and then approved by the United Nations. So this is the order of discussions now. Obviously, the Americans, when they looked at it, they freaked out completely. Trump already rejected it. So the problem is he already rejected, but as we know, everybody knows, as I would say camels in the middle of the Gobi Desert already know, anything he does, there's no way out for him. So he can assume he can admit the strategic defeat, which he'll never do. He can restart the war, which is going to be a major disaster, and even his own generals told him it's going to be a major disaster. Or he can try to find a composite. But with the illegal, murderous blockade on. And the Iranians said, no way. We only start discussing if the blockade is out. And Trump is basically saying, first, we have to discuss about the nuclear deal, and then the rest. So, Nima, we are in the middle of a horrible strategic impasse. And we don't know the way out of all that for the moment. It looks pretty bleak. But after all that, the last stage of the trip, which was the icing on the cake, Arakshi gets to St. Petersburg in a Mirage Airlines flight, a normal commercial flight. And the title of this, inscribed in the fuselage of the plane, this flight was the Minab 168 flight, a direct homage to the girls killed by the two-tap tomahawk assault on the Minab school. He was received not only by his counterpart, Grandmaster Sergei Lavrov, but by President Putin in person. 1 hour and a half of discussions. Many of us will not remember Putin receiving not a head of state, and even with head of states, that's very rare. They usually talk for half an hour, exploding 40 minutes. He was talking to a foreign minister and his team for 1 hour and a half. So obviously the leaks that we have are very vague, but this is what I got three key points that I stressed in my column. Some of the things that Putin said, they were absolutely outstanding. Let me see if I find the key points here, Anima. Yes, here they are. Because I want to re-stress for you and for our audience how sophisticated and at the same time sharp as a dagger was Putin addressing Arakshi. Point number one, total respect for the supreme leader, Ayatollah Mojtaba Khamenei. Putin said, last week I received a message from the supreme leader of Iran. And then he said, please, to Arakshi, please convey my most sincere words of gratitude, confirm that Russia, just like Iran, intends to continue our strategic partnership. Please convey to the Supreme Leader words of gratitude for this message and wishes of the best health and well-being. So it's the total opposite of how Ayatollah Mojtaba Khamenei is treated by the Americans. By Russia is total respect. Point number two, Iran is fighting everything. The whole fight of Iran is about two key items, independence and sovereignty. These are words of Putin himself. We see how courageously and heroically the people of Iran are fighting for their independence and sovereignty. Amazing. And point number 3, which is the absolute killer, and obviously the Americans are completely freaking out about it because now it comes from Putin's own words. We will do everything that serves our interest of all peoples in the region. So this means he was addressing Arakshi, but he was also addressing everybody else in the Persian Gulf to ensure that this peace is achieved as soon as possible, meaning Russia is now directly involved in a diplomatic solution for the war. And the last thing he said, Nima, which was a killer, this is Putin telling Arakshi, you know our position well. Wow. So when you put this all together, what do we see? First of all, that Iran turned the chessboard upside down, and now it's showing to the Americans, if you don't follow these 3 conditions, this war is not going to end. And they know that Trump needs an off-ramp, and he needs this war to end. This war is immensely unpopular in the United States, and Trump's numbers are absolutely appalling, and they will continue to go down. And number 2, Iran and Russia announced to the whole planet that they are in this together to find a solution. So Russia has got Iran's back, and this comes directly from Putin. Now try to explain this to the Epstein Syndicate. Now they're going to have to deal not only with Ayatollah Moshtaba Khamenei, but with Vladimir Putin as well, if they want a solution for the war that they started illegally and murderously against Iran. So that's why, Nima, this trip was something, this was a game-changing trip, really, really. No hyperbolic, no. This was the real thing. It was very well planned, very well organized. Arakshi was absolutely impeccable. And in the end, of course, they had to finish in Russia with, I would say, showing not only to the Eurasia environment, to the global South as a whole, that this is very, very clear that not only Tehran, but Moscow and also Beijing, which was just observing from a distance, this is a war against Eurasian integration, against BRICS, against the SCO, against the global South, and obviously Russia has to be on the side of Iran. Obviously, Nima, none of that will be accepted in Washington or in Mar-a-Lago. So we still don't know how the American response is going to be. As it stands, decided to prolong the naval blockade indefinitely. This means he's not capitulating, which is something that he could do. He could just proclaim victory and walk away. And then that's in terms of a strategic, the strategic defeat of the Americans would be very clear for the whole planet, or he can restart the war, which is going to be an absolute disaster. So he decided to prolong the blockade, and we know that the rest of the world sooner or later is going to explode against the blockade. This blockade cannot last for weeks, not to mention months. Let's say it could last for another 2-3 weeks maximum. After that, when people start seeing the absolutely horrendous effects across the global economy, there's going to be a movement, and a concerted movement, especially from the global South, to turn this thing around. And Iran, they have time on their side once again. Okay, Nima, this is more or less the the summary of these very fateful days between Islamabad, Muscat, and St. Petersburg.
I think considering the behavior of the United States as a country for such a long time in Iraq and Afghanistan, we've seen that they continue to sort of their agenda in those countries as long as it takes, and then someday they decide that there is nothing there anymore and let's leave it. And the problem here, by the way, with the war against Iran is the global economy is under tremendous pressure, as with the case of the Strait of Hormuz. Nobody knew the importance of even here in the mainstream media, in in the alternative media, we didn't know the scale of dependence on the Strait of Hormuz before this war started, and how this could influence the global economy and put pressure on many countries. Look at Japan today. What is happening in Japan? That's why look at South Korea. Look at what is happening right now in Europe. They're desperate. The situation is getting worse as time goes by, and this is not Iraq. That's why I think this is not Iraq and Afghanistan to stay there for 10 years, 20 years, and let's see what would happen. This is something different, and the United States is not going to be able to stay there in that region. This blockade is getting it's they're not getting anything positive from this blockade, in my opinion. The United States is not getting anything positive. And on the other hand, they're convincing Iranians that the United States is not serious in the way that they're talking about negotiations or anything of that sort. That's why Iranians really feel that this next round of war is going to happen anytime soon. And your understanding of that, Pepe?
Oof, it's a very, very, very long story, because even allies of the US are negotiating with the Iranians to have a passage through Hormuz. Paying, of course, for Japan and South Korea, no problem. As long as their tankers can go through, no problem. Other Iranian tankers, for instance, they found a way already to dribble the American blockade. It's to navigate very close to territorial waters in Iran, in Pakistan, and all the way to Mumbai. It can be done. If you stay within the 12 nautical miles, you can go. The Americans are not, theoretically, are not going to attack you. Lots of tankers are passing through one way or another. So it's not an ironclad blockade. Once in a while, we have a Hollywoodish Netflix production where the Americans say, we boarded, the Marines boarded so and so and so, and then he had to go back. And then we made a mistake because he thought he was going to Iran and he's not. Blah, blah, blah. So it's inefficient. Obviously, they cannot patrol the whole Arabian Sea and the southern Indian Ocean. Absolutely out of a cut. So they are in, I would say, more or less. And by the way, nobody went to actually check how many warships are in the Arabian Sea, in the southern Indian Ocean, and what they are actually doing. So we rely on CENTCOM and INDOPACOM, blah, blah, blah. And these people lie all the time. So we don't know for sure what's really happening. Anyway, is this going to work? No. Is this going to actually change Iran's mind in terms of the control that they exercise on the Strait of Hormuz? No. Is Iran dribbling the blockade? Of course, they are dribbling over land. Iran is a crossroads, not only maritime, but over land, historically, zillions of years. So, for instance, what do we have? Pakistan, they opened 6 overland corridors to Iran. So Iran, they can move now even oil. Of course, the quantities are not the same as if you're moving oil by tankers, but a certain amount of oil is already being moved by railway on the China-Iran railway, which arrives at 20 kilometers outside of Tehran with no problem. They need to step up their game. Of course, they need to dribble the technical problems of exporting larger amounts of oil by rail to China. They will find it. The Iranians are always, they're masters at improvisation. On top of it, there's gas, for instance. Gas, you can go through the Turkmenistan to Xinjiang gas pipeline. They can do swaps with Turkmenistan and export some extra gas via this pipeline going straight to Western China. So there are other options. These are products that need to arrive from China to Iran. Now it's not a problem anymore because of these six overland corridors unblocked by Pakistan. For instance, there were, I think, at least 3,000 containers that were stranded in Karachi. They could not move. Now they're moving overland to Iran with essentially Chinese products. So Iran is not going to be starved out of Chinese products, merchandise, goods, etc. So there are many ways to dribble the Americans, of course. It's not about, and the Caspian. The Caspian is it's more complicated. For instance, for Iran to sell oil via the Caspian, the problem is the infrastructure of the Iranian ports in the Caspian. You know that, Dima. It's not very good. And it's nothing that they cannot do this in a matter of a few weeks. And it requires a lot of investment as well. But they can also use the Caspian to, from the Caspian, for instance, to Kazakhstan, to Aktau in Kazakhstan in the Caspian, and from Aktau to China. Also possible. Smaller volumes, but also possible. There is one key question which I would like to ask you about, Nima. There's an enormous blah, 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 basically on hearsay and numbers that cannot be fully checked, that Iran has only a few days when they reach maximum storage capacity, especially in Karg, in fact, everywhere. And then they're going to have to be shut-ins in the oil fields. What is your analysis about that, Nima? Because everything that we hear is from Epstein syndicate sources, but not from Iran, not from official sources from the National Iranian Oil Company, for instance. They're not talking about that yet. So please tell us, is Iran going to be in dire straits in a matter of what, a few days, because they don't have any more oil storage capacity?
No, nothing.
Pepe, I love your answer. No.
No, that's not the case, because they had this experience long before these sort of problems happen in Iran because of the sanctions. There were years that Iran couldn't send any oil, to export any oil to other countries, and they managed. They knew how to manage the situation. With the walls, with the with the oil, with gas, everything. They have managed that. They have experience because it happened before, because of the sanctions, not because of the blockade. Mm-hmm. That's why they know the engineers in Iran who are working in this field. They know what is the alternative and how they can manage the situation with these sort of difficulties, sudden difficulties. I would say this is because the blockade is some sort of surprise for Iran, but it's not that much of surprise that is not manageable for Iranians. They know how to deal with it, I think, and they. So right now, it's not even one of the biggest issues in Iran. Nobody's talking about it. You look at the that's why it's a hoax.
There's not
they're making something, Pepe.
Oil company, nothing. So this means it's not a real problem.
They're making these sort of rhetorics, Pepe. It's not just about this, because they're making that there is some sort of fracture in Iranian leadership. They're fighting each other in Iran. Donald Trump says they called me. They said that we are collapsing here. They're making these things up because they want to influence. Basically, their audience is in the West, is not in the East, is not in Iran. Because the Iranians know what is happening. They know the reality on the battleground. They know the reality with the case of energy, the shortage that they have. The economy, how it works these days. They totally understand the reality of what's going on. But I think what we are talking about is about what is happening in the West, in the mainstream media, in the way that the Trump administration tries to picture the situation for the Western audience, in my opinion. I don't see any sort of, difficulty, any sort of, somehow crushing difficulties for Iran. These are difficulties for Iranian economy, for Iranian energy. Nobody can ignore that, but they know how to deal with that. This is the basic problem. That's why they're not talking about it in the mainstream media, in the alternative media in Iran, because many people think that Iran is just one-sided media. No, it's not that. You can find the worst critics of the Iranian government are in Iran, are living in Iran. They're not
Exactly.
outside of Iran. Many people don't understand it. And that's why nobody's talking about this in Iran. That's not the major issue right now. The major issue right now for Iranian is how nobody can talk, because they're talking about this fracture in the leadership, the left and right. I don't know what is happening in the mind of Donald Trump. But these people, the basics, or they have different tactics for the negotiation, for how to deal with the United States. But the strategy remains the same. They know that nobody would let the United States to control the Strait of Hormuz. Nobody would dictate anything to Iranians anymore. And if, because of the sanctions, they were able to force Iran for such a long time, to force Iran to some positions, it wasn't a serious position to force Iran to accept something, but they were trying to put a lot of pressure on Iranian economy to force them into something. Or that's not happening anymore. That's everybody's saying that that's enough. That's not going to happen anymore. This is the outcome what Donald Trump achieved so far in Iran.
And this is reflected by the way they turn the game around, where the most important, the key imperative now is not and it never was, the nuclear dossier. It's to end the war for good, so there will be not a repeat of the war, with guarantees, with guarantors at the level of big powers like Russia and China. Then discuss Hormuz, and at the end of the whole thing, discuss JCPOA 2.0, let's put it this way. And Iran can do that because they're for all practical purposes, they are winning this war. Everybody knows that. It's the Americans that wanted this stupid ceasefire. It's the Americans who are trying to find an off-ramp, which they can't. And the strategic defeat is obvious because zero of their initial objectives were achieved. There you go. So no wonder Iran is feeling confident.
And nobody wants anything similar or close to JCPOA anymore.
Exactly.
That's the point for the Trump administration.
Exactly.